a judge and forced to answer to a federal judge. Rick Hasen, a professor at UCLA School of Law and director of the Safeguarding Democracy Project, he writes this about this case in a new piece. The federal indictment just handed down by special counsel Jack Smith is not only the most important indictment by far of former President Donald Trump, it is perhaps the most important indictment ever handed down to safeguard American democracy and the rule of law in any U.S. court against anyone.
And Professor Hasen joins us now. First of all, great to see you again. That's a high bar, Rick. To say this is the most important case ever to protect democracy, why do you say that?
Well, I don't use those words lightly, and I didn't say anything like that about either the classified documents case, which is quite serious, and also the hush money business records case, which I think is a pretty minor one. What makes this particular indictment unique is that it involves an attempt to try to subvert the results of the 2020 election, to try to overthrow American democracy, to turn the election loser into the election winner. So far, Trump has not been held accountable for that. He was not convicted in the Senate. He was not facing any civil liability. This is the only chance to have deterrence of Trump and of others like him who might try to steal an election going forward.
I want to get your take. We've got a lot more questions for you, but also in hearing from the former Attorney General Bill Barr and reacting to the indictment, he called the behavior that he read about in the indictment nauseating behavior, and it gets to what you're speaking about right here. Listen to Bill Barr.
You read through the indictment and his behavior in that indictment, and it's nauseating. It's despicable behavior. Whether it's criminal or not, someone who engaged in that kind of bullying about a process that is fundamental to our system and to our self-government shouldn't be anywhere near the Oval Office.
And Rick, Bill Barr said a whole lot more in that conversation with Caitlin Collins. What did you think of that?
Well, I was more taken by what he said at the end of the interview. I was on with Caitlin right after, and I heard Bill Barr say he still didn't know if he would vote for Donald Trump if he were the Republican nominee in 2024, which tells you a lot about the state of the Republican Party. I mean, after saying it's nauseating, after saying it's despicable and undermine democracy, I mean, the point is that there is nothing like this. This is not like a normal dispute between liberals and conservatives or Democrats and Republicans. It's about whether we're going to have a rule of law and have democratic elections. And there's got to be a line that someone can cross where you just can't accept them regardless of your party. That's not where the country is right now. And I think we really have to hope that this trial, if it does happen before the election, can bring people focused on this issue and see what kind of danger it is when American democracy is undermined.
But one of the issues here, Professor, is people want to be able to go to a document, say the Constitution or something else, and say, there is this statutory language that makes clear that the behavior was criminal. You know, Bill Barr, in his statement there, he said whether it's criminal or not, he doesn't think Trump should be anywhere near the Oval Office. But that whether it's criminal or not part is key here, right? I mean, two questions. One, what do you think happens?
Sure.
What do you think happens if the jury decides it's not criminal?
Well, I'm not convinced that we're necessarily going to get to a jury because this is a very complex case. Unlike the classified documents case, it involves many witnesses. We may not see a jury before 2024. But if it does and the jury reaches its verdict, then we'd have to accept that verdict. But I think there's an education function that's going to happen when the public can see the evidence. And more to your point about, is this a crime? There are specific elements that have to be proven. That Donald Trump, for example, corruptly obstructed the counting of the Electoral College votes by what he did. There are elements that have to be proven. That's, you're not going to find that in the Constitution. Specific crimes are not listed in the Constitution, but no person is above the law. And if Donald Trump can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt to have committed these crimes, he should be punished in the same way that any other person who would try to commit these crimes would be punished. That's what the Constitution talks about in terms of equal justice under the law.
Well, in terms of people wanting to look for a paint by numbers and where the boundaries are, what you do, and where you break and where to break glass. The way Van Jones was talking to John and I about it yesterday was the fact that the transfer of power really hasn't ever gone into extra innings before in this way, and it did this time, and this is what happened. So, what should people, you talked about an education piece of this, but what should people know? How much gray area is there, and how difficult does it make this case?
Well, I'd go back to Bush versus Gore in the 2000 election, hard-fought election, many bad feelings on both sides. Case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, which resolved the dispute in a controversial way. And then Al Gore got up and he said, I don't agree with the Supreme Court, but I accept the result. That was a peaceful transition of power. When conservative George W. Bush left office and Barack Obama came in, nobody was questioning, would he actually leave the White House? I mean, we're in a totally different realm now. After Donald Trump had his chance to bring over 60 lawsuits to try to prove fraud and succeeded nowhere, to raise irregularities and succeeded nowhere in showing that the election results were in question, he engaged, according to the complaint, an illegal scheme to try to come up with fake electors and other ways of undermining the peaceful transition of power. We've never seen anything like that. That's why it's somewhat unprecedented to bring a prosecution like this, but it's only because the actions of Donald Trump, as alleged, were unprecedented as well.
And if he is found not guilty or it never goes to trial, does this open the door for this type of behavior in the future?
Well, you may remember when the Senate did not convict Donald Trump after the House had impeached him for these actions. Mitch McConnell, the Senate Minority Leader, a Republican, said it's going to be civil and criminal liability that's going to hold Donald Trump responsible. Now, of course, we're taking a gamble on whether the criminal process will work and will work in time. There was a chance earlier to politically deal with this, which is what the Senate should have done. Didn't happen then. So, I am worried about our democracy, but we have to leave these questions to the courts and to the juries to make their best determination based on the evidence that will be presented.
Professor Richard Hasen, always great to have you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Coming up for us.